Katie Maycock, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I've seen you on stage a few months ago, and you are an anxiety expert.
Yeah.
I'm dying to learn how you become an anxiety expert. Think I have it's a more complicated story than it sounds. But before we do that, let's maybe kick it off with something a little simpler. Can you please tell us who you are, what you do, and why do you do it?
Fair enough. So I am Katie. Thank you for introducing me, and thank you so much for having me. I had such an awesome time when I spoke and you saw that. So that was really awesome for you to invite me in today. But what I do is I work with a lot of corporate professionals, namely like CEOs, founders, managing directors and things like that, talking to them about the impact that stress has on their body, their mind, and the impact that it's having on their business. So that's what I do.
And why?
Why do I do that? That's right. I thought I forgot something. So the reason why I got into what I'm doing is when I worked in corporate for 10 years and I really busted my butt, but I didn't realize that I was stressed or had anxiety. I didn't really think that that was me at all. But when I was around 26, 27, I started getting really severe health issues that just came out of the blue in what I thought was out of the blue. But I mean, we're talking, I had cold sores all up my face, my body was riddled with inflammation. One day when I was 26, I got out of bed and my left hand was 3 times the size of itself. I was severely unwell and it just progressively got worse. And every time I went to the doctors, they're just like, we can't find anything wrong with you. And then they would start saying, oh, you're just stressed or anxious. And I was like, I don't think so. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm all right. But at the end of the day, when I started looking at the impact that stress has on the body, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I do have stress. Maybe like being super highly strung isn't just a part of who I am. Maybe it's actually, there's something else going on here. So when I started realizing that and overcame, burnout and those health issues and recognizing, oh, hang on a second, anxiety didn't just ruin my health, it also impacted the way that I worked, it impacted my productivity, impacted the way that I had mental clarity. And I realized I was like, I'm not the only one. Like, I'm not the only person in corporate that has felt this way. So I decided to create a business to help other people in similar situations to make sure that I go down the same path I went down, and 2, to just make sure that they can be the best versions of themselves physically, mentally, and emotionally.
You said a few things that piqued my interest. First, so you said you were working for corporate for 10 years while experiencing heightened levels of stress and anxiety.
Yeah, so I worked in recruitment and corporate sales in a couple of different jobs. But I burnt out two times in corporate, so I had to quit my job, I had to go home, rest up, and then I went back into it and did the same thing over again.
So this podcast is called Startup Nightmares, and it's talking about situations that are particular or unique or the way they manifest in the startup ecosystem. And one of the benefits, supposedly, of not working for a startup but for working for a corporation is that you have more established protocols, HR departments, welfare, wellness teams that are looking after you. You're describing a situation when you repeatedly experienced the implications of heightened levels of stress and anxiety, but there was no one there to pace you.
Nope. I guess when you're working in a corporate situation, sometimes you get lost. I think also, this is, we're going back a few years ago now, like 10 years ago, like 8-10 years ago, where burnout wasn't really spoken about, stress and anxiety wasn't really spoken about. And I did have good managers that were like, hey, is everything all right? But, I was in denial. So even if you came to me and said, hey, I don't think you're coping, I'd have been like, no, I'm fine. Like, I can keep going. And, that, it really did just filter out that way. So yeah, I had the support there, but I mean, I might not have taken it myself because I was in denial for an awfully long time.
If you were in denial and you didn't know what you were going through, and your managers didn't know what you were going through, it's also very hard to spot it on others.
Yeah,
it can be. It could be that your cubicle neighbor is going through super hard times, and you just dismiss it as it's work, it's pressure, it'll blow over.
Yeah, I think we normalize stress and anxiety, and I think it's a normal part of work. It's how many times do you have a conversation with a friend and you're like, hey, how are you? And they're like, yeah, I'm good. I'm just really busy. Or I'm just a bit stressed out. We say it in such a normal way that it's become a part of everyday life. So I think that when someone comes to you and just go, oh yeah, I'm really busy, I'm just a bit stressed out, it sounds really nonchalant, like it's not a huge issue. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that I see today with stress and anxiety, you know, especially when you work in like a high pressure job, if you're in sales, if you're in startup, you know, you've got targets to hit, you've got quotas to meet. It is quite pressured, and you have a lot of deadlines as well. So it seems to breed stress and anxiety, and it seems to be the norm.
And what I understand that kind of help you break through that circle is not when, you know, when the stress and anxiety became visible, as in cold sores, as in your hands becoming 3 times bigger, like if it's internal, if I don't sleep well, if my digestion isn't well, like it's easier to contain. But now when I have to explain to the environment why my beard is falling off or why I have cold sores on my face, like this is when you go and see the doctor.
Yeah, I think when, you know, obviously when I got to that point, when I look back, like hindsight's a beautiful thing. But when I look back, I definitely had warning signs. I just didn't pay attention to them. You know, I wasn't sleeping. But in my head at the time, I was justifying that. It's like, it's okay. Like, I'm just being really productive. I'm doing what I need to be doing. It's okay. Like, sleep is optional kind of thing. And at the end of the day, it's really not. You know, when you're starting to have the physical symptoms that were coming out, my body was really at the point. It's like, hey, you didn't listen to the little warning sign of, you know, a bad digestive system, and you know, you weren't listening to when you had the aches and pains. You weren't listening when you had the headache. Here, have something severe. And it was like my face. So, yeah. It's
easy to attribute some of those issues to other things. Well, I'm not eating well because of the long hours at work. It's not because my digestive system is messed up. It's because, you know, it's the takeaway noodles at 11, eating them from my desk.
Yeah, I think it's easy with digestion, though, to blame it on something other than stress. Like, we don't link it. So a lot of people... The reason why I got into stress and anxiety was I was doing digestive health stuff. And one of the common themes that I saw with my clients was they all were stressed and anxious. I was like, okay, so I had this experience, but now my clients are having the same experience as well. So there was... you know, a common theme was I have to start focusing on digestion as well.
And you go to your doctor and you explain to them what you're going through and your lifestyle, and they don't have an answer for you.
No, they didn't. Every time I went there, they're like, oh, you're just stressed and anxious. It's just like, that's fantastic. What am I meant to do with that information?
And
so
what were you meant to do?
I had no idea. They didn't really give me, for me, my experience, they didn't really give me any options. They were just like, oh, you know, just relax. It's like, if I could, or if I knew that I wasn't relaxing, maybe I would. So I needed a little bit of extra support there.
Part of what you said about normalizing stress and anxiety is also learning to live with them. And this is how things are.
I think that's a really big one. I think everyone's like, oh, stress is just a part of life. It's like, it is to a point. But, you know, we can't remove every single stress from our life. That's just unrealistic. We actually do need to have some kind of stress in our life. It helps us keep us alive, especially with the fight or flight response, right? You know, if you're crossing a road and a car comes zooming past, you want to know to jump back. That's, you know, we need that kind of stress in everyday life, but we don't need to be living in it 8, 10 hours, 16 hours a day, which a lot of people are living in that kind of stress and anxious world, and it's having such a detrimental impact on their body.
The fight or flight you're mentioning is it's part of a internal biological protocol.
It's an automatic response to a perceived threat or a perceived stress.
Which is the difference between also stress and anxiety, right?
Yeah, so stress is, you know, you're having a physical reaction to, you know, a car driving down the road, or if we go back to like prehistoric times, a lion, tiger, or a bear. But anxiety is the same physical response that you would have with stress, but there's no stressor there anymore. There's no reason for you to feel that stress. So you could be sitting on your couch, absolutely having nothing happened, and you get that moment of like, oh, I'm feeling a bit anxious, and there's no rationale behind it.
I had a friend, American, in San Francisco. She knew what anxiety felt like, and only after she told me, oof, I'm feeling a little anxious, and I asked her, what does anxious feel like? And she explained to me. I'm like, oh wow, so this is what's it called. And I've been anxious plenty of times beforehand.
Yeah.
Is there a way for a person to understand if they're experiencing anxiety or stress?
I think sometimes that we use the words interchangeably, so we've got to be really careful on how we use the language. It's like, I'm just really stressed and anxious. It's like, Okay, cool. So I think it's understanding what are you actually stressing about, but are you just sitting at home and nothing's really going on? There's no reason for you to be stressing, and underststanding what's going on in your life and taking sort of an audit of your life. It's like, does it make sense for me to be feeling this way towards anything? And I think it's really easy to go, oh, it's work. But when you dig a little deeper, it's like, what is it about work? Like, what is it about these things that are causing these physical reactions? So I think anxiety is quite a bit more severe than just being stressed. And it's a constant feeling.
You mentioned something about the warning signs, and I'd like to learn more about what do they look like, how to spot it, how to spot them on ourselves and on people around. Meanwhile, I also want to ask our producer if you can bring me something. I want to share with you something I've done yesterday. I've been to a mental first aid course
cool.
yesterday. I'll bring that up. Yaski,
Yes, sir.
there's a little booklet on the bookshelf for my course yesterday. Do you mind bringing it?
The booklet on the bookshelf.
This bookshelf.
Oh, this one.
Yes. So what are some of the warnings? What are some of the warning signs? Thank you. We can see on ourselves and on others.
I guess the best one is to understand yourself, really. So for me, I had to go with the physical signs and symptoms of, okay, cool, am I not coping with the stress? So for me, it was more like, okay, what's going on with my sleep? You know, asking yourself really simple questions like, are you falling asleep easily? Are you waking up feeling refreshed? Are you waking up feeling tired? Or are you waking up feeling agitated? There's some pretty good signs that maybe you're feeling a bit more stressed than you actually might be aware of. The other thing is really understanding your digestive system. Like understanding, you know, how, are you going to the bathroom too often? Are you not going to the bathroom enough? Are you eating lunch and feeling incredibly bloated? That's another pretty good sign that you're feeling really stressed out. An interesting fact about stress is, like I said, it's a physical response, but if we're feeling stressed, what actually happens is the blood flow to our digestive tract actually changes. So it actually flows away from the digestive tract to go to our arms and legs for like running away or potentially fighting a threat. So if we're eating food in that, you know, we're not really digesting our food properly. So this is a big reason why digestion is getting hugely impacted. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, I've just got IBS. I've just got an allergy. I've just got an intolerance. It's like, okay, maybe you're actually just not managing your stress. Like maybe you're just not coping with that aspect. You know, a few of the other signs is, you know, how am I actually feeling? Do I feel energetic throughout the day? Am I feeling tired? You know, and I think the other things is understanding what are your behaviors like? That's another really big one. Are you normally somebody that's really calm, really chilled out? You know, you go on with your day, but then all of a sudden you're starting to snap a little bit quicker. You're getting angry, you're getting frustrated quicker. Things are irritating you more than normal. There's some pretty good behavioral signs that you're like, okay, maybe I've got some stress going on. Like maybe there's something there as well. And I think on other people, I think someone will always tell you when you're stressed out, and it's easy to see it in someone else rather than in yourself, I think. But I think sometimes when you see people, especially if they're looking, you know, frazzled, you know, there's people that you come into work and they seem like they kind of vibrate into work because they're so stressed, if you know what I mean. They're pretty easy to spot.
Vibrate into work.
You know those people where
like
they just...
I know exactly what it looks like. It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, so I think that's a good way to spot it too.
A few things that you said that I'm like, oh my god. One is waking up agitated.
Yeah.
It happened to me a few times, and it felt very wrong when it happened.
Yeah.
But I was blaming myself. Maybe I reached for my phone a little too soon.
Yeah.
Or maybe I don't know. I should have gone to bed an hour earlier. So I was very angry with myself. But I was waking up, and already my day was ruined.
Yeah, you wake up and you're like agitated, you're nervous, or you're really excited, and you're like, I don't really know why. I spent a lot of time doing that when I was like, you know, in my head, I was like, I'm just really excited for life. It's like, yeah, but it didn't feel good after a while. Like after a while, I was just like I can't really breathe properly. So yeah, it's kind of frustrating when that happens.
You also said managing stress. So is stress a given?
I think it really depends. So the people that I work with and from what I've seen is, sometimes something that starts off as a small stressor that's really not a huge problem, as their business grows, becomes a huge problem. So that's something that I've noticed, especially with the guys that I work with.
Can you give an example?
So let's say someone's got a sales team that maybe they're not able to retain enough. They're not retaining their sales. Like maybe people are dropping out, but they're like, that's okay, we'll just get more people on. Instead of actually, when you're starting off with that, that's okay, I'll just keep getting new clients, and that's not a huge issue. But as the company grows, if you haven't solved that problem, you're going to have that huge cash flow problem when you go further into your career. And so that small stress will turn into a really big stress. And so I think sometimes stress isn't necessarily always a bad thing, but sometimes you have to pay attention to it and understand, okay, how can I get over that? I think life, you're going to get thrown curveballs in life. It's just a given. Like you're always, if it's at work, like you're going to have a bad day. You're going to have a bad month. You're going to have times where things are quite difficult. You're going to have difficult conversations. You're going to have difficult meetings. You're going to have those feelings of stress. But having the coping mechanisms is going to be really important. So being able to understand, to recognize your stress, pay attention to it, and understand, hang on, okay, what can I do in this moment? Like, what could solve this problem? How could I remove this stress? So stress is kind of a given in life, but if you have better coping mechanisms, you'll be able to respond better rather than, a lot of people go, oh, that's future me problem. Like, that's future Katie's problem. She can deal with that. I remember when I was in my late 20s, I would always go back, oh my God, I hate past Katie. What does she put me in now? Because I'm in a bigger problem than I was if I just dealt with it then. So
the part about managing stress I get. It's inevitable. You want to live at least for periods of time outside of your comfort zone, so you will be stressed. Fair enough. But in startups, oftentimes when your remit at work is very, very, very broad, and you're trying to do things that are unprecedented in an environment that suffers from a lot of uncertainty, so you also have to choose what to get stressed about.
Yeah. That's a I work with a few people that have done startups, and when you're doing a startup, you're kind of the jack of all trades, right? Like you're doing everything, or you're trying to do everything. You're trying to build a team. You're trying to do all those different types of things, like crowdfund or get money, get investors, and all that kind of stuff. And you're wearing all these different hats, and that can become super overwhelming. So being able to understand how to manage that and prioritize is what I've noticed with startups is one of the biggest and important tasks. And choosing, do you know what? That's my highest priority. That's something I'm going to focus on. That's what I'm going to tackle. Everything else, I can do that. I can do that later. Like just taking those small bite sizes of the business.
The key word is choosing, because you won't be able to do everything. You won't be able to do even the things you chose to do at the level you'd want to do them. And I think that's where managing stress becomes a super critical part of succeeding or not succeeding. You also spoke about noticeable behaviors and looking, am I being more irritable and so on. And that's very hard to do, in fairness. Like you need deep self-knowledge and the ability to self-reflect to be able to say, actually, I'm far away from my baseline.
Yeah. And I think that, having those self-check-ins daily to be like, hey, did I... sometimes we don't know what we've said, but there's a feeling inside us. We're like, I could have probably handled that a little bit better. Pay attention to that, because I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed, especially people that are stressed, they get an uncomfortable feeling, but because they've got so many uncomfortable feelings, like, I don't want to deal with that uncomfortable feeling. I'm going to just go and do something that I like. So let me just put a Band-Aid on that and go do something that I like. But you got to lean into them, because usually that bad feeling is like a behavior that you didn't really like about yourself. So being able to be like, okay, cool. Like I just yelled at my, my colleagues or my partner or my parent or whoever it is. And it's like, that was super out of character. And people will tell you when you're out of character. Normally it's like, dude, you're out of character. Like,
if you're lucky.
If you're lucky, yeah.
If you're lucky, and if sometimes working startups means working in autonomy. You're working remotely sometimes. You're working with people who are swamped and are dealing with their own things, so they're not as their antennas are not as acute as you'd want them to be. So you can go for months without anyone realizing that you have a problem, or if they're especially self-reliant, maybe they find like, I cope with my stress, you cope with yours. So there's no mutual accountability in that regard.
I think the other thing is as well, people don't like talking about their stress. They don't like talking about that they're not coping. And I think one of the biggest elements, especially when you're starting a business, it's, well, you know, it's just a part of the job. It's just a part of what we're doing. And, you know, and you don't want to talk about it as well. It's like, well, I don't want to come across like, you know, I can't do this. I don't want to come across like it's a weakness. And I think that that's another huge element of it. So yeah, talking about it or even spotting and someone else can just be like, you know, if you see someone else being stressed, a lot of the times it's not always beneficial to go to them like, hey, you look stressed. How can I help you? Like, do you know what I mean? You've got to tackle that in a really different way.
Subtle and indirect.
Yeah.
So anyway, in that course, what we did, part of the exercise, the idea was that you can identify certain types of mental illnesses and provide initial response to them. And one of the things they did is they told you to create this stress container.
A stress container. I
Yeah.
like it.
So they're like, they've had this little triangle and they said, write down the things that are stressing you out.
Yep.
And just a brain dump, write it down.
Yep.
I have to say it was a very stressful experience because, you know, they say count your blessings, which is a good life advice in general.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm healthy, I have friends and family that love me, And then you're putting down everything. I was like, lack of focus or purpose, expectations to do well, maintaining my lifestyle, my status, perfectionism. We're working on this project and I'm holding it in a super high standard.
Yeah.
What happens if I don't get it right? Relationships and my approach to them in terms of like where I am in my life relationship, backlash of leaving my previous workplace and everything that comes with that, making a wrong move. So basically the coupling again with a bad startup or a bad manager, being unable to prioritize in my own personal life because all these things require some attention.
Yeah.
Hurrying to get back to work. I just had a complicated experience. I need to heal before I go back, but also financial stress
Yeah.
and opportunities and you know, just the feeling of value that you drive from. So I was worrying about that and general insecurity. That's a part of that's an ongoing theme. So I write down all of these stressors. Some of them you can relate, some of them other people can relate.
Yeah, for sure.
When you say managing stress, and this is a pile of stress.
Yeah, it's a pile of stress. Yep.
How does one go about managing it?
I think sometimes you've got to. So if I was to work with you, I would go through a lot of the things that you said with what you said. Kind of they tie to obviously your self-worth. They look at how you view yourself and how you are worried about other people perceiving you. I think looking at that, it's understanding, you know, what is actually the essential, like what is really important right now and how does that physically make you feel. And also a lot of the times what are the stories you're telling yourself about these things. I think that's a huge one. I think a lot of the times with stress, like how many times have you been stressed about something and it's like, actually I really didn't need to stress about that. That was really not a problem. I built up a problem that wasn't really there. It's just because of the stories that we're telling ourselves. I think sometimes it's going back to, okay, cool, like I have a lack of focus and purpose. Well, how about I just spend some time focusing on my purpose and breaking it down into one, you know, chewable aspect of that. I think the biggest thing as well for people is to understand how stress feels to them. Like, where do you feel your stress? It's a physical response. So how do you know when you're feeling stressed out? So for instance, a lot of people will say, you know, I feel stressed I feel it in my stomach, I feel it in my head, I feel it in my hand. So it's like understanding that and understanding the physical aspect of it and stopping that, you know, the what ifs. I'm guessing a lot of these will come with, okay, what if I don't find this? What if I don't find that? I actually liken stress to like a door-to-door salesman. No disrespect to door-to-door salespeople, they work very hard, but it was just something that came to my mind when I was working through my stress. It always knocks on your door at really inconvenient times when you don't have time to really deal with it. You're like, I am so busy, I don't have time to be dealing with the stress and the what ifs. And, you know, you buy the first what if. It's like, well, what if, okay, let's just choose one here. It's like, what if I, you know, let's just say I can't pay my monthly bills, whatever, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay, I can't pay my monthly bills, I don't have a job. That what if is like kind of a fair what if. Like, do you know what I mean? Like it's rational to a point, but then the next what if comes with it. And it's like, well, I won't be able to meet my rent, I won't be able to pay my bills, I won't be able to eat food. Okay, well then, what if that happens? Then I'm going to have to move out. I'm going to be either having to move back to my parents' house. What happens if I can't move back to my parents' house? I'm going to be homeless. I'm not going to, and then comes in the status. Then comes in the way you perceive yourself, and then comes in how you gain value. You know, you end up, by the end of the story that you're telling yourself, you're trying to figure out and you're reacting to, I'm homeless, I don't have any money, how am I going to buy food, how am I going to find shelter? And it goes down that what if cycle really quickly. So it's being able to stop yourself and actually working with, actually, let's work with some facts right now, rather than the story that I'm telling myself and the what ifs that I'm buying.
The sensation that's associated with some of those stressors is very gloomy, you know?
Yeah.
I think about them and I don't have the slightest idea of how to start solving for them, let alone manage them in parallel with others. And I know I'm not the only one. And the question is, yes, stress will probably always be there, especially when you're working with highly ambitious people such as the ones you do. You know, GMs, MDs, CEOs, all sorts of other abbreviations we can throw. Like men and women in fast-paced environment that have to make decisions, carry their own anxiety at work, their personal life, in all of the directs as well. Sometimes they're boards. And how do you help folks who have to normalize stress and anxiety to perform? How do you help them understand? Because there is also that value of resilience and powering through. I mean, it's a tool for them. They have to be able to endure. Yeah. But also they have to be able to know when to ask for help and how to ask for help and what help.
I think a lot of the times, you know, you have to take a bit of the audit. So what I do personally as I work with, okay, cool, like where's your physical health right now? Most of the people that come to me, they're like, I'm physically not coping, like my nutrition's off, like my sleep's off, all of that's off. So we get them back to baseline on diet, exercise, and sleep, because if you physically feel bad, it's going to be so much harder to overcome that stress, that anxiety. It's going to be so much harder to be able to get to that level. And then we work on, okay, cool, well, how do you react to stress? Let's actually, when you're feeling those moments of overwhelming stress, giving you some exercises to do. Like, what can you do? Like deep breathing. What can you do every day to help make sure you're setting yourself up for setting yourself up if you are going to be in a stressful situation? What's the mindset you need to go into? Like, how can you, focus on the facts? Like, what can you actually be doing in those moments? And then the third thing that we do is, okay, cool, let's have an audit of your business, of your life. What are the things that are causing the most stress? How can we mitigate them? How can we lower them? How can we either remove them or change a bit of a focus on them? Because I think that that's a really big aspect. And let's work with, like I said, like working with the tools that we've got right now and building on them. So they're the three ways that I sort of work. And I think sometimes it's taking that massive step back and understanding where you're actually really at. And I think taking one step at a time rather than trying to focus on everything. Like if you try to focus on everything on your list at once, it becomes very daunting and very overwhelming. But just going through and going, do you know what, today I'm just going to focus on making sure that I'm doing okay, my health is doing good, I'm doing this, and that's what I can tick off today. Maybe tomorrow you start looking at, okay, cool, like I'm going to start looking at, what do I really like doing? What is my purpose? What are my values? How can I work and build that up? Because I think once you have that understanding, you feel a little bit more empowered to then start working on building a business that you enjoy, building, those elements as well. But then if we're looking at people that have already got companies, it's understanding what do they enjoy? What can they be doing more of to make sure that they're getting back to baseline? Because a lot of the times these guys these people get lost in their businesses but 20 years down the track, they're like, what am I doing this? Like, what's going on? So
I know that your website has a protocol that kind of anxiety relief protocol 101 type situation.
Yeah.
I've gone on to look at it and it's super, super helpful. If we distill it. So first of all, if you look at a list of all the stressors in your life, categorizing them.
Yeah.
Self-worth, super philosophical, but also things that are super minimal, like time management.
Yeah.
Productivity, yeah. So
yeah.
Categorizing them, prioritizing them. And then you mentioned a biological baseline. Is that a hard sell to people who always eat on the go, work late, don't have time to exercise? Do you have to do a lot of convincing in order to get them to understand that their mental health is reliant on a physical one?
Actually, that's actually the least hard sell that I have to usually get people on. But the way that I sell it, I'm like, if you want to run a business, you have to be physically able. You have to be physically being able to do it. It's not all, and your brain and your body aren't separate things. Your mind and your body have a connection there. So you have to be able to make sure that you're doing that. But I also talk about, how do you physically feel? They're like, oh, I'm really drained. Like, I don't have any energy. It's like, well, let's fix that. Like, let's get that back. So we need to focus on you as a physical human.
You're saying let's get that back, but how many people have actually experienced peak performance because you slide into the workforce, and 10, 15, 20 years later you realize something had gone horribly wrong, and you don't have a tangible,
like, you have no idea of what you're meant to feel. So it's like that, you don't know how good you could feel until you feel good. I totally understand that.
Like modern medicine describes health as the absence of disease.
But some of these, you got to remember, stress is going to cause disease. So sometimes these guys are coming to me going like, my digestion isn't quite working. Like, I've got cardiovascular disease. They might have something going on, or they have a fear of it because maybe they've seen somebody in their senior go through it. There's so much talk about cardiovascular disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, all that kind of stuff. People are scared of getting that. They're like, I don't want to have that. So, we do see that shift. Like, I am seeing those people that are like, I just really want to prevent this. I just don't want to have that physical health issue. And a lot of the times, that you're right, they don't know how good they can feel until they start changing one small thing. And a lot of the times what I do is I meet them where they're at. So if you're somebody that's like, I eat out all the time, I don't sleep, I don't do anything for myself, I don't do exercise, I come and meet you where you're at. I'm like, okay, cool. How about we just agree that you have breakfast in the morning? Like, you have one meal that you cook at home this many times a week. And then we build up from there. So it's, you've got to meet them where they're at. Like, you can't just do, hey, have a whole overhaul of your life.
It's insane to me because you know what it looks like when it's done right.
Yeah.
And it's written everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not knowledge that is hard to obtain.
No, it's not.
You don't need an anxiety expert to know that you need to eat properly and sleep well and exercise. So why is it so hard, and how do people slide into situations that require external help? And also, how can you convince them that having breakfast is a beginning of a solution for their whole lifestyle situation?
So I started off as a nutritionist. That's actually, before I went into corporate, I ran my own nutrition business. And a lot of the times people would come to me going, I want to lose weight. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what does that mean to you? And they'd give me their whys and all of those kind of things. So by the end of it, they would give me like, I go, give me an example of your diet. And it would be immaculate. We're talking like there was nothing wrong with their diets. I'm like, what's going on here? But they knew what they were meant to be doing. They just weren't doing it. So you got to figure out why they're not doing it. A lot of the times when people start up businesses, they'll have this, oh, do you know what? I just need to get through this first phase of, like, maybe you're in the beginning stages of your business. Like, I just need to like work on my business, and then I'll get back to eating well, and then I'll go back to, training, and then I'll have a proper night's sleep. But once they get to that, whatever, milestone that they're trying to reach, things just get busier, right? Like, if you're starting to build a business, like, I'll just hire 10 employees, and then that'll take a bit of pressure off me, and we're starting to make money, that's okay, and I'll get there. But once you're there, you've got 10 people you got to manage. You've got other hats that you're now putting on, and you've not actually implemented what you said you're going to do. And it's like, okay, cool, now what I need to do is I just need to reach this goal. And then you start creating bad habits, and then you're like, well, I'm here now, like, I'm just going to keep going. I've clearly gotten to where I need to be. Why do I need to do that? And by the time you've looked back, it's like 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, and you're like, I never went back into the gym. So a lot of the times what we've got to do is, my whole thing is like, you're a human being first and a business second. So you are the human being in your business. And what if you could be doing better, being more productive, being able to better handle problems? We work on that aspect. But to get there, you have to have a clear mind. You have to have a good diet. You've got to physically feel good. What if you could be doing better? And I think that that's one of the elements that I talk to people about. And yeah, they know what they're meant to be doing, but they don't understand the seriousness until they get sick. And sometimes I think it's the future me problem. I'll deal with it when I'm older. It's like, you don't want to be dealing with those problems when you're older. Startup
is classic because you only deal with a problem when you cannot not deal with it anymore.
Yep.
And the same logic applies to health in that regard. I remember one day, my former CEO at Jolt, we sat down and we were very stressed over something, and he said something. He says, guys, this is the calmest, the most relaxed you will be in the next 2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So better manage your situation now, appreciate it, figure out how to prepare yourself for what's coming, because it will get worse, it will get harder. And in fairness to him, this was foresight that a lot of founders don't have. But the idea that you have to human first, business later, I mean, so much meaning is coming out of enduring, out of pain. As a man, I identify pain with progress.
Yeah.
You know, if it hurts, I'm probably doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the age-old saying that you've got to suffer before you get progress, right?
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
And how does that narrative manifest itself in the executives and the startup people you work with?
So a lot of the times it's really, I've only ever had one client that really pushed the boundaries on this one. And he was really in that, putting out Spotfire's face in the startup, where everything's a problem, he's, wearing 100 hats and putting out 100 Spotfires. Like, I just don't have time to give to myself. And it's like, well, what can you do for yourself? Like, what is one thing that you can commit to? And it's an accountability, right? Like, if you're accountable for a business, you're accountable for yourself. So being able to put that accountability in there, even if it's just, what? I'm going to make sure I go for a 10-minute walk every lunchtime just to walk off some of that stress and that anxiety. Because like I said, stress and anxiety is a physical response, right? You've got adrenaline, you've got cortisol, you've got blood sugars in your blood. If you can just walk that off just for 10 minutes at lunchtime, that's fantastic. Like, why? Like, there's no harm in you doing that, right? And it's giving them the reason behind it. But then this also comes back down to their why. So why did you start your business? Why do you want to, why are you doing what you want to do? A lot of the times, they want freedom. But it's like, but you've trapped yourself, kind of. So get back some of that freedom by owning your physical health, owning your sleep schedule, owning your time a little bit better. Because the more time, here's the other thing. A lot of the times people don't understand, the more you give to yourself, the more you can give to your business half the time, or give to other people.
I think that resonates.
Mm-hmm.
I think that resonates. And when you look at an athlete and you realize, okay, if Usain Bolt wants to break his own record and he wants to be able to compete in the next Olympic, it's about those inches. It's about those mini optimizations because they add up. So I think that makes sense, and that's probably also a relatively easier sell. But is it really as easy as to start off with a 10-minute walk outside the office? Like, if you want to get your life back in balance, is it really as easy?
Yeah, because you've got to break habits and create new ones, right? So if you start creating one habit, maybe that 10-minute walk will turn into a 20-minute walk. Maybe that 20-minute walk will be like, hey, I'm gonna go to the gym at lunchtime. Like, it's creating that realization. Because you've also got to remember, you're trying to persuade these guys to take a step back from work and actually give some time to themselves. So you can't give them a huge amount of time straight up, because then they start realizing, hey, the office didn't burn down in the 10 minutes that I was out, or like that extra half hour that I didn't go in, or whatever it is. They start realizing. But a lot of the times you've got to be working on other things, right? You've got to work on their mindset. You've got to understand what they're actually wanting. By the time people have come to me, they know what I'm about. Like, my business is pretty clear, right? So if you're coming to me for help me with this, it's like, well, you've got to do what I'm saying, right? If you don't do what I say, I won't hire you as a client. Like, I won't let you be my client, right?
Yeah.
So most of the time people know what they're getting into. Now, I personally will give people all the information. If they don't like it, then that's on them. But you have to own it. Like, I'm all about ownership, accountability, taking responsibility for yourself as well as your business. And you need to take responsibility for yourself and your business at the same time. You can't just take full responsibility of your business and lose yourself in that.
What you're saying about accountability also, I think, ties to capability.
Yeah.
Do you believe you can change? Do you believe that this is something you can control, and maybe a small habit that you break gives you the control back? Like, actually, I can carve myself those 10 minutes. Actually, I can leave work half an hour early to cook my own dinner.
Yeah.
And believing that you can change is huge. So even if the physical benefit of a 10-minute walk is not something you would see in your next blood tests, the ability to take control over your life, your habits, your productivity, that's something you can scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, what happens if you just own that, I want to go to the gym twice a week, and you do that. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, that actually made me feel good. I actually felt better. Going for a 10-minute walk is actually going to make you feel better as well. So you'll come back, you're like, dude, I actually feel pretty good. So I'm going to keep doing that. So I think it's being able to set achievable goals. Here's the other thing is as well, a lot of the times when I get clients, we focus firstly on what they can do like with their physical health. And I always say to them, I have to meet you where you're at. A lot of these guys come to me like, I'm ready for this massive overhaul. Like, I really want to change everything. And I'm like, it's super unreasonable and unrealistic that you're going to be able to achieve that or maintain that in the long term. We've got to meet you where you're physically at. A lot of the times these guys have been athletes. They've been like into sport. They've been exercising. But it's been 10 years. But they want to go back to what they were doing 10 years ago. It's like, okay, we have to be really honest. We have to own where you are right now, how you got here, and we have to reverse that back.
Yeah.
So we've got to take that into account as well. You know, so many people go into the gym and into health like, I'm gonna do this massive overhaul, but 2 weeks later, like, it's so hard. It's like, please, let's ease you into it then.
You need a positive experience if you want to do it. If you don't want to do it again, we spoke off record about CrossFit, and CrossFit could be so demolishing the workouts itself that you don't want to go back. So you need to find a competitive, like a gym that's not too competitive, that you can go in and you don't have to kill yourself every workout. Because if you do, you don't want to come back. If the bodily sensations are so severe, you know. So it's the same. It's the same with those habits. Like, if you carve out 3 days out of nowhere and you disappear, and your team doesn't know where you are, and they don't know what to do when you're away, then of course you're going to come back into a shit show. So starting small in that regard is probably even healthier, even if it means the outcome is going to take a little longer to arrive.
Yeah, I actually had a client who incorporated his team into workouts. So like they would go do workouts together to get them all out of the office and doing it all together. It's like, we're going to do team bonding once a week. We're going to go do this workout, and they would all do it. It was pretty cool. I was like, that's not a bad shout, getting everyone involved, and then it feels like, well, everyone's in here. I'm helping them out. They're doing their thing. So
think of I agree with that in general. But I will also push back against it, because I would say, think of that person who hates, or who hates yoga. And all of a sudden, what's a stress relief for one person becomes a source for anxiety for another.
They didn't force them to do it. It was the people that wanted to go, but going, hey, if you want to come along, let's do a group thing. And
I think it's important in startup context, because founders build their companies and their cultures in their own image. So you need to be mindful that what causes you relief and pleasure could be causing another person anxiety. And I think that needs to be encouraged. Like going back to self-knowledge, know how you heal from the day. Know what you need to do to show up prepared the day after.
And it's also knowing your limits, right? I think a lot of the times we forget our own limits. So, you know, when you speak to these people, they don't understand that they've overextended their limits. They haven't known, do you know what, maybe I've pushed it too hard. Maybe I've done too many 16-hour days in a row. Like, maybe I haven't had enough weekends off. And it's being able to understand, hey, you know what, like, you need to take that step back and understanding you have a limit. You need to figure it out. And, you know, that's what we do, right?
You need to figure it out. That's the key, because you don't know your limit until you've met it, until you've passed it, until you're like the road runner.
You collapse in a heap on the ground.
Exactly, you're the road runner. You're flying off the cliff, and then you look down and like, oh shit, okay, the cliff ended there, and I'm like, it's a little too late to go back now.
And I think sometimes self-reflection is one of the biggest things. And self-awareness is one of the biggest things that you've got to do, especially with anything in life, right? You need to be able to look back on your day and go, did I do that the most effective way that I could have? Yes, no. If it's no, what could you have done better? Like, why didn't you do good at it? Like, what are you going to do next time to set yourself up? And a lot of those times it's, you know, you have those conversations like, oh, I wish I said this, but, you know, for next time. Or, you know, hey, do you know what? Before I went into this meeting, I was really agitated. I was really angry. Maybe next time, if I'm feeling agitated or angry, don't have that meeting. Don't go to that. You know, reschedule, because they're not going to get the best out of you. You're going to feel bad about yourself, and you're creating more stress in a situation. And I think it's understanding where you're at physically and what you're capable of doing. And I think that's a really important aspect to it as well.
Yeah, and I think self-awareness also ties into knowing that the people around you are probably suffering from that as well. So of course, if you're the junior member of a high-performing team, okay, you're carrying the anxiety now. You're the one that needs to prove it themselves. But generally speaking, your manager is probably suffering from certain levels of stress and anxiety, and your colleagues are as well.
Yeah.
How does one facilitate these conversations or do that and avoid the stigma?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I've got to say the UK have been doing a really good job of talking about it more. There's some phenomenal companies out there actually talking a lot more about mental health. You go on LinkedIn, so many people are sharing their stories and actually being vulnerable and starting to talk about it. I think it's going to start becoming a company culture, because obviously if you're that one person in a company culture that's very, feels very, sterilized and very rigid and very cold, you're not going to feel like you can trust people to open up to. But creating like a warm culture from a company standpoint, if that is what a company wants to do, and a lot of companies are really wanting to focus on this, because hey, they're losing great staff, they're losing their top performers because those top performers are burning out and getting stressed out because we didn't know what was going on. So I think it's creating a culture where it's acceptable to talk about in a safe zone. Having education, like doing a first aid course for managers for mental health and understanding what that looks like. And also understanding, a lot of the times when managers become managers, having that training to communicate properly, listen properly, watch for warning signs properly is going to be really important for people. And I think it's got to come from a company-wide thing. I just don't think one person's just going to be like, I'm just going to start being vulnerable in front of people, because they don't know it's okay. So I think it's got to come from the top and going, hey guys, it's all good. Like, especially when you're in a startup and you've only got a few employees, sharing that's like, hey guys, we're like, I'm stressed as well, and I'm really trying hard to like get through this, and I understand that you guys are stressed. Let's have a chat about it, because maybe you're stressed about something that's an actual easy fix and you guys can talk it out, and having that communication is really important. But you have to feel safe to do that, right? You can't just jump in and do it.
And you can't also assume that your team or directs know that now is the time to step on it, and now is the time to let go.
Yeah.
You just cannot assume that. You need to help them flag. Guys, we're entering the summer months. I want you to know it's okay to show up late and leave early while things are slow.
Yeah.
And just saying that and not having to look around and see what's going on with other people. It's okay. I don't want to see you available. I don't want to see any green lights on Slack when I leave the office. Like, say that. Don't assume they know.
I think that's a big thing. I remember this is funny. I put up this is years ago. I think I put up a video on LinkedIn saying, hey, something that you can do that's really simple is, when someone writes when you're out of work and someone quickly writes you an email, if you're somebody that has the notification on the phone and they look at it and that person's going to respond, why don't you just not send that email, or send it, if it's not urgent, you don't need to always send that email. And I've seen companies really impact. It's like you're not allowed to email somebody that's not in the office. I've actually seen that work well with some companies.
Wow.
Where it's like if they're off, like you can't email them unless it's like really urgent. But like seriously, how many times are you getting an email that's really urgent on your day off, or like, at midnight or whatever?
It's about one of the coping mechanisms to stress is to roll it over to someone else. And
Yep.
I think that's a huge driver in those types of behaviors. I used to say to my team, guys, if I'm working weekends, it doesn't mean you have to work weekends.
Yeah.
I don't want to bombard you. Like, I don't want you to come in on a Monday and have like 20 emails just arriving in your inbox at 9:31. So if they're trickling over the weekend, don't worry, don't feel forced to respond. You know what? I don't think they believe me.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been, I think that's, for what I've done, one of the biggest things I actually teach companies is teaching the people to actually give themselves time in the mornings. Like, I always say the 9 to 5 is dead. That's not a part of our everyday life. We seem to be working more frequently. It's like technology. It's been one of the greatest things that's happened to us. We can work anywhere in the world. We can be doing anything anywhere. We can get our emails, we can get phone calls, we can do all of that. But the downside to that is the pressure we feel to always be on, and the pressure that we're always having to work and we're always having to do something and respond quickly, and there's that sense of urgency. And
just knowing that something is in my inbox, even if I choose not to do anything about it, still takes a toll, because I know it's there, and now
you
it's
have
like,
to read it, you have to think about it. It's in your head.
It's like if you're talking about nutrition, they say a diet starts at the supermarket. If you don't put it in your fridge, it's easier to avoid it because it's not in the house.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same with emails, because if that email is now in my inbox, I have to actively resist opening it versus just like not having it at all.
So I time my phone. So my phone and my laptop are timed. So I can't go on certain websites, certain apps before a certain time, because I know whether I obviously have self-control, but a lot of people don't. But what happens if we put that into place? So I talk a lot about, hey, put downtime on your phone. So iPhones and Androids have those capabilities of, it's like, I'm going to not look at an email until this time or, and no later than this time, and really implementing that, because you're creating a structure. And it doesn't have to be completely different, but how many people out there, the first thing that they do when their alarm goes off is to look at their phone?
I've never done it. I have no idea what you're talking about. My morning routine is I woke up at 5 a.m. I drink 3 types of green juices. I do 2-hour gym session, 30 minutes meditation. Then I journal.
Only 30 minutes meditation?
Yeah, well, I'm a busy person. And then I do a gratitude exercise.
Yeah.
And after that, a face mask. And at 3 p.m. I open my inbox.
I mean, dude, that sounds the life, right?
Oh my God.
But
if only.
But that, the amount of times I'll ask this question when I'm doing talks, right? Like, how many of you, what's the first thing you do in the morning is check your phone, even if it's Facebook, Instagram, or emails, or a message, or whatever, subconsciously you're taking in someone else's information that they think's important. You're not thinking about, okay, cool, like, how am I feeling? How am I thinking? Like, what are my desires? What's my purpose?
Self-awareness, we talked about that.
Yeah.
If we talked about waking up agitated, sometimes waking up agitated, okay, I look at the news and I'm like, obviously you'll be agitated. So, but then I'm externalizing the reason for my agitation. I'm like, of course, it's because of the coronavirus. So
how many times, I call them the 10%ers. Those times where, the times that where you get really angry at something and it's like someone cut you off in traffic, right? You're like, and you're really angry and you're focused on that, like that's the reason why I'm really angry. But if it happened to you on another day, maybe you wouldn't be that agitated. So it's having that moment going, probably 10%, that probably just tipped me over the edge. But what got me to this point, right? Like, what got me to this level of stress, and having that, the understanding of where's your anxiety dial? Is it set to full or is it set on low? And if it's kind of high and someone cuts you off in the traffic, you're going to be pretty high. Like, you're going to be super high after that, right? So it's understanding, how did you get there? Like, what are the things that are getting you to that, like, really riled up?
So part of the self-reflection and self-knowledge is not being as spongy, as absorbent of things that are happening around. And I think that's huge, because the whole how do we use our phones is huge.
Yeah,
it's been talked about tremendously, but if you have to stop doing it, there's plenty of good reasons. I think another one would be just because you want to gauge your feelings, you want to gauge your sensations. It's fun to do it. Like, just wait 2 seconds before you do that.
I say wait. Like, I start off small with most people. I'm like, let's start with 10 minutes. Just like, before you get out of bed for 10 minutes, you don't touch your phone. And you ask yourself those questions. How am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I wanting? What am I desiring? What is my purpose?
How did I sleep?
Yeah.
How did I sleep?
Simple questions, right? How am I hungry?
Look, I outsourced that. I use Sleep Cycle for 5 years now.
Yeah.
And when I wake up, my girlfriend asks, so how'd you sleep? I'm like, let me tell you. And I go in 71%. And she goes, what?
Yeah, but then the other thing is as well, you can tie that, like, you can trick yourself into, it's like, oh, I've had 90% sleep, right? And it's like, no, I feel really good.
Yeah.
But then you've had 50% sleep, it's like, oh, no, I haven't, right? It changes your mindset. So I actually had to stop using Sleep Cycle because I realized I wasn't actually asking myself, I was asking my phone. So I wasn't asking my internal clock going like, did I actually sleep okay? Like, how am I actually feeling?
This morning I woke up and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, it showed like a 90% score. And I'm like, you are lying to me.
Right.
Like, this was not a 90% a sleep quality night. I woke up, I went to the toilet, I woke up at 5 o'clock. All of a sudden, I reached out for my phone. I needed to write the name of that guest I wanted to invite. Like, this was not a 90% night. Like, you don't know what but it's like, well, 90%, so I guess I should be fresh.
Your phone's telling you how you feel. That doesn't make any sense. You need to ask yourself that question, like, how am I feeling? Like, I've had those nights where I've slept 10 hours and I'm like, I had this, and that's really rare, but I love them when they happen. But it's like, okay, cool. Like, how do I actually feel? Sometimes I'm more tired after a big sleep and, my phone might have told me I had 90%. It's like, but I don't feel well. And if we're relying on technology to tell us how we feel, it's like, I'm actually a human being that probably knows myself better than, a phone. But some people don't, right? They haven't asked themselves enough questions. They don't have that internal dialogue to be like, what am I actually feeling? Like, what's actually going on?
This is where panic attack becomes useful.
Yeah.
Because they break that narrative.
You can do useful goods, right? Positive spin on it.
You can no longer lie to yourself. If you've experienced a panic attack, you know that the story you've been telling yourself has that's it. It has expired.
Yeah.
And it has to happen to you for you to understand, okay, something's got to change, because that is one hell of a scary sensation.
It is an awful sensation. And I think, the day the day that I woke up and I was like, all right, I'm going to start paying into the stress and anxiety stuff was, you saw it in my talk. I woke up and I had a cold sore, like, it was a quarter of my face. Like, it was all up my jawline. And I remember looking at myself, myself in the mirror, and I'm a client-facing, person. I'm healthy. I'm this. And I look like Shirin Baratheon, right? Like, my face is covered in, like, bumps. It's awful. And I looked at my face and I was like, okay, no, I can't keep denying the impact that stress and anxiety is having on my body. I was having panic attacks at that time. That wasn't enough for me. It was actually obviously like a vain thing where it's like, I'm female and I was like, I can't leave my house for a week now. That's pretty inappropriate. But it's so sad that, I kind of look back and there's this, I remember before I used to get so angry at myself. I was like, why did I wait that long to like seek help? Or why did I wait that long to actually take it seriously?
Why do we spend so much time in relationships that should have ended, in jobs that we should have quit?
We get so uncomfortable when we get uncomfortable when it's the unknown, right? Like if you have to change what you've been doing, that can cause fear and that causes anxiety, right? It's like, well, I remember back in the day, I could be the top salesperson. I could be, doing really well on my job. And it's like, well, stress got me there. So what's really the issue? Like I've become so successful to that. And I tied my self-worth to my success. And I was like, so I kept on pushing. I kept on going with it. But at the end of the day, was it worth my health? Absolutely not. Like I will absolutely hands-on. I actually physically couldn't do my job in the end because I was like, I can't get out of bed, right? But I get mad at myself. Like, why did I wait that long? And I understand how I got there, but I also didn't know that there was another way. And I think that that's a scary thing. It's like, well, I'm this successful from using this as a fuel. Like people use stress as a fuel. I agree with that. But it's not a limitless, it's not an endless pool, right? You will drain that fuel source. And then what have you got left?
Is a panic attack the new rite of passage?
I hope not. But I think a lot of people suffer with them. I think a lot of people have been getting them, especially, I'm seeing a lot of really young people getting them.
Really young people getting them.
Yeah. I'm seeing like teenagers. I've seen teenagers. I don't work with kids often, but I've had parents go, I think my daughter had a panic attack. I'm like, she's 9. Like, what's happening?
No.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want it to be a rite of passage, but it is like a badge of honor, though, stress, right? Like, look how busy I am. Look how, look how awesome I'm doing because I'm so busy. I'm doing so many things. Look how productive I'm being. And it is like a badge of honor, right? Like it comes with, how people view you. It's like, oh, you're so stressed. You must be successful. Oh, look how many things you're doing. You must be successful. And then it's like, well, success in what way? Right? Like you've got to put meaning behind the word success.
I want to do a bit of a profiling of people who are more prone to stress and anxiety. I have my thesis and my hypothesis about it, but I'm wondering if there's a difference between males and females and their susceptibility and coping mechanisms.
So from my experience, women will typically get more stressed, but they'll also talk about it a lot more. So they'll go to that. They'll open up a bit more about it. Guys feel stressed, but they don't feel like they can open up a little bit more about it. So the coping mechanisms that I can work with women and give the same coping mechanisms as men. I typically work with men. That's just not by choice. It just kind of happened naturally. But women typically will talk to a friend, will go to somebody and talk about it. Guys will hold it in because it's like, I'm the man. I got to go to work. Like I got to like make, I got to make the money. I've got to do all these things, but I can't show that that's a weakness because that's my job, right? Like we stereotype, we typically stereotype men as being these strong people who can just hold on to everything. So I think that understanding that coping mechanism is a bit different between men and women. I think that we're seeing it more and more in both sexes.
What advice would you give women with their partners professionally or romantically to help them cope with stress or acknowledge that it's there?
That's a really good question because obviously you've got to be really careful in how you approach it with somebody, especially. I'll give you an example. So my fiance has just started a tech startup himself. And when he first started, he was working 12 to 14, 16-hour days. And I went up to him and I said, babes, you know what I do for work? Like, what are you doing? Like, you know that I tell everyone not to do this. Like, let's have a chat about it. Like, do you think that this is sustainable? Like, do you want to have a chat about it? So obviously that was my approach to him. He didn't want to listen to it until one day he came to me and he was like, oh, I understand now what you were saying. Like, those types of things. So I think
what happened that the penny dropped?
The penny dropped. He just literally, he woke up one day and was like, I can't get out of bed. Like, he was super anxious. He was, you know, he was really just like, I couldn't sleep, or I couldn't eat. He was like not going to the gym. He wasn't doing self-care.
And that's when you go to sleep every night next to an anxiety expert and he still doesn't have a board of directors or employees.
Yeah, right. He had all the tools there. So I think it's the way you approach it, and I think it's how you want, it depends on the relationship, right? How do you communicate? And it all comes down to communication. It's like, you know, sometimes you've got to go up to your partner and your loved one and be like, hey babes, you know, I can see that you're a little bit, you know, I can see that you're working a lot harder, you're doing a lot of things. Is there something that I could be doing to help? What do you need? Do you want to talk it out? Is there something that I can help with? And seeing how they cope with that and going, look, I'm here to talk. Like, what would you like to do? Some men just won't do it. Some men will just be in denial, right? Like, and you can't help somebody that doesn't want to help themselves. It's really difficult, especially in that relationship. But opening that door, going, you know, we having that conversation and having those relatable conversations. And I've seen partners do the whole, hey, listen to this really amazing podcast, and it was a guy talking about this. I thought you might relate to some of it, and giving them that podcast.
More subtle, indirect.
Really subtle, indirect ways to do it, and you know, kind of, it can't just be, I've seen people, and I've been this person where I'm just like born to China house. I'm like, hey, you look really stressed out, let me help you. And it's like, that's not going to help anyone, especially your partner.
That's good advice. Before I left work, we were a bunch of friends. It was supposed to be a big goodbye trip for our crew, people I met in Ireland, and the team split. One goes to Dubai, one goes to South Africa. I went to London and then to Israel. So we met, and we're supposed to have this one last hurrah together. And they saw I wasn't myself. I was at the phone, my moods fluctuated, and a few weeks later, I text them all and say, guys, listen, I've left work and I'm leaving London. And the first thing that they said to me was, congratulations.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm like, congratulations. It took me a second. I thought they were being cynical like they usually are. But they were like, no. Like, screw work. We just want to have our pal back.
Right.
And super, super heartfelt. And I think that if we're talking about anxiety and stress, at a certain point, the best thing you can do for yourself is not to figure it out professionally, is to stop being affected by that negative dynamic. When I told the story to my friend, our producer, and he says, listen, you're going through a shit show right now. You're in a car that's just flipping over, and it doesn't matter if it lands like this or if it lands like this, upside down or downside or downwards up. You just want to end the situation that's impacting you so tremendously. And I think that's another thing. We talked about how, back to the founder profiling and how stress and anxiety are sometimes glorified, but how you can find folks who are ill-equipped to deal with what they're experiencing. Yeah,
and I think it's interesting because when you speak to a lot of people, they just don't want to feel that way anymore, and the thing is like, I just don't want to feel this way anymore. But it's like, we need to understand how you got here. You need to be really honest with where you're at and what's actually the biggest stressor, and understanding what do you want to do about it. Like, what are you willing to do about it? Like, are you at the point where you're like, I just can't, like where you are at, it's like, I can't do this anymore. I've got to get out. And you know, I think taking that ownership as well, and like understanding where you're at, it's like, it's understanding who you are and where you're at and what you can do. And I think understanding your choices. And I think the biggest thing is that people forget is that they do have a choice. They have a choice in what they can do. And that can be really powerful.
They do have a choice.
They have a huge choice.
And that's a really big deal, because you need to know when the stressor is you and your coping mechanism and your lifestyle, and when the stressors are a bad environment, a lack of compatibility with the role, or something completely external.
Yeah, you've got to understand, okay, where is your stress coming from? Is it work or is it your relationship? Is work causing your relationship issues, or your relationship issues causing stress at work?
Yeah.
Where is it at? Because you probably, to be fair, when we look at really long-term stress, people that have built these companies maybe they've impacted their relationships, the things that they really love, and they it's the same thing with personal health and, physical health, like, oh, like going to the gym and that. Maybe they go, I'll give my wife or my partner or my husband more attention once the business is up and running in this part, but that person still feels neglected, right? That person still is feeling like, well, okay. But then they get to that point and they're like, well, now I'm too busy, and they've gotten into that habit of, accidentally neglecting their partner and going, well, it's okay because they're still there. And at the end of the day, they're like, holy shit, like, what have I done? And I think it's understanding that role as well and understanding that foundation that they've created. So I think sometimes you've got to be really honest. I think it's easy to blame the simplest things, and sometimes it's the more complex things that you've got to understand. It's like, do you hate your job? Are you not made for it? Or is it you don't really like the environment, or you don't really like the relationship you're in, or is there something else going on inside you that you're not listening to? Are you suppressing certain things that you want to do that you can't?
Yeah. And once you have that level of knowledge, is this internal or external? And if it's external, where is it coming from? Then you're also forced to make a choice.
You have to make a choice whether you want to find ways to solve it or if you have to leave.
And if we're talking about startups, maybe this is not the best point in your life to be doing that, because it's heightened stress and anxiety. It's a lot of uncertainty. It's so many moving parts. Maybe this should wait another 3 or 4 years. Maybe you should find a co-founder before you embark on that journey all on your own.
Or find better coping mechanisms and better understand yourself. One of the biggest things when you start a business, you got to understand who you are, how you respond to things, where your stress levels are at, what your coping mechanisms are, how you can communicate that, right? Because when you're building a business, you're going to have to, there's so many moving parts that you've got to try and manage. And stress and anxiety make you feel like you're out of control. Like, the reason why you're feeling that way is like, I feel like, I can't control anything. And then you're trying to set up a startup as your foundation. It's like, it's a rocky foundation that you're building a house on. So we need you need to really making sure that you, at a core, have the coping mechanisms and the resilience, which is you still need resilience, right? I'm not saying resilience is a bad thing, but knowing where you're at and your limits and what you can do.
In a way, a conversation that I guess for you would be very hard, because people come to you wanting a solution for their anxiety, not a professional consultation saying pull out.
Yeah, it's kind of tough sometimes.
What are some of the stories you came across?
So one of my clients, they had a startup, their foundation that they built their startup on. They were already an anxious person. They already had severe health issues. They were already sacrificing so much of who they were as a human to build this up. And then what ended up happening was they ended up having problems within the business. So, but the way that they had built it up was their communication to their senior management team was really off. Their senior management team was giving them feedback, but they couldn't hear it or wanted to hear it because they were so anxious because of where they started off from, that they're like, I can't deal with that. That's not an immediate problem right now, when realistically it probably was an immediate problem right now. Or to that person, to their senior management, you hired them to tell you what you needed to know. But instead of actually managing that out and managing those problems, they kept on scaling. They kept on scaling. And, at the point where they, not only they want to quit, right? Like, they get to the point where, like, a lot of their problems could be solved, but they've drained that energy where problem solving now and managing that stress is so overwhelmed where they're just like, I want to just curl up in a little ball and just like ignore the world for a little bit, right? It's like, no, we need to chip away and find some way where you can actually find control. And sometimes it's owning what you can do in this moment, right? Like, if you can manage that and just one little thing, own that and do that. And then let's build on that. But because obviously you want to feel, when you feel anxious, right, you kind of feel a little lost. You feel like, you have that negative self-talk as well. You have that real hard person, like, you can't do this, you can't do this. Like, you can, you just need to find the better coping mechanisms. But that was a pretty painful story.
The anxiety just clouds everything. It clouds your judgment, and it hinders your confidence.
Yep.
And it just topples your execution.
Execution, communication, decision making. When you're in those moments of really high stress, especially in the beginning stages, you want problem solved quickly, but sometimes a quicker solution might not actually be the most effective. It's like, yeah, that looks really good. It's like, No, wait. Is that, I think a lot of the times with startups and new companies, they look at a problem instead of actually going, how did that come about? How is that a problem right now? They just go, let's fix it. But it's like, no, was that a symptom of another problem? And they haven't, and because you're in such a rush, you haven't taken that step. You haven't built that foundation of actual problem solving in like what I call like an archaeology dig in your business. Like that dig into yourself and into your business. Like, is that actually a problem or is that a symptom of something else?
Startups hate that because
Yeah, they do.
it's an organism that is solution oriented.
Yeah.
You are a problem. Your product solves a problem. And when you come in and say, hey, maybe we're not solving for the right problem, it's sometimes being perceived as negativity.
Yeah.
As not being solution oriented. And then you find yourself solving the wrong problems and smaller problems become bigger and it just trickles and
It's like a cancer, right? Like if you don't fix it at the beginning, it spreads. So you've got to be very careful with what the problem is. And I think a lot of the times we get attached to an idea of what we do. And when we start executing it, especially new businesses, when we start executing it, if you have that very analytical, that very like, this is what I do, this is what I've told, this is a story I've told myself, this is a story I've told everyone else, and you become incredibly rigid with that way of thinking, you can't actually see the other opportunities that maybe if you just did a little evolution in your business, maybe you could just change one little thing, your business would actually solve a proper problem. Because sometimes these startups, I'm guessing, they have an idea of a problem, but realistically it's like, hang on a second, it's like, I've seen a bigger problem that I could fix, but they're so set in their mindset. And you know, the companies that do really well have that ability to be flexible and evolve and change and mold and tweak.
Reiterate the product, the vision, the mission. And I think this is one of the things that help cope with uncertainty, is knowing this is not a Catholic wedding. You can still change, you can still adapt, you have to, in a way. Katie, this has been amazingly helpful. I personally took a lot from speaking with you. Any closing thoughts you'd want to leave the world with before we go on and conclude?
I guess the biggest thing is, you know, stress and anxiety doesn't have to be a part of everyday life in the way that you think it. It's not one of those things where you have to just go, oh, stress and anxiety, it's everywhere. You know, I have said that things are stressful in life. That doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to have the coping mechanisms. Finding someone to talk to, whether it is a professional, whether it is a coach or whoever it is, finding someone to actually help you if you need those coping mechanisms. But you yourself is probably the best way to actually go inwards and go, cool, what's actually going on, and have that self-reflection. But realistically, at the end of the day, there's always a solution to your problem. Finding it is, and owning that is really, really empowering and actually quite beneficial for most people. So that's all I have to say about stress and anxiety.
It's quite a lot, and I double down and say self-knowledge, self-reflection, an environment in which you feel safe. It doesn't have to be a whole environment. It has to be at least one person that you can share and that tells you the truth about actually you're not, you know, the best version of yourself right now. And if you can't find the solutions, or if the solutions you're trying are not giving you the results you're after, then go and seek professional help. We haven't said a word about burnout. It's a world of its own for people who feel like burnout is what they're experiencing and not necessarily stress and anxiety. I would also encourage them to reach out to you.
Yeah.
Where can people go to learn more about your work?
So I do a lot of work on my website. I'm always putting up blogs and videos. So www.katiemaycock.com, and also LinkedIn. I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. And all the ways to reach out to you would be also available on the show notes. Katie, this has been a huge help for me and hopefully for our listeners. A lot of lessons learned the hard way. Hopefully we can save some people some of those lessons, huh?
Yeah, hopefully we talk about that self-reflection from our own journeys. So yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You.